Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us in the first of our webinar series on the Every Student Succeeds Act. My name is Jennifer Webb, and I serve as an education consultant in the Office of the Deputy Commissioner at the Connecticut State Department of Education. Today's session will provide an overview and will focus on building further knowledge to support LEAs and understanding expectations during the transition to full implementation of the ESSA. Before we begin, I'm going to review a few logistics. If you have a question or would like to make a comment, you can type into the chat box, which is found on the right side of your screen. Please send your comments to the host so we can organize and answer your questions in an efficient manner. Also, please note that everyone is on mute in order to eliminate all background noise. Throughout the webinar, there will be a few polling questions that will be asked. The poll will automatically show up on the right side of your screen. You can choose your answer and then make sure you click Submit on the bottom right. When everyone is answered and the poll is closed, you will also see the poll results show up. And finally, I just want to remind you that today's webinar is being recorded. That takes care of logistics. Let's go ahead and get started. Today's presenters are Cohn, Deputy Commissioner of Education, and Ajit Gopalakrishnan, our Chief Performance Officer. Ellen, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking part in this webinar. Here at the CSDE, we have been, since last January, reviewing and trying to digest the 1,400-page law that's come to be known as ESSA, Every Student Succeeds, and we're committed to keeping you, superintendents and central office staff, informed and up to date with all available information. This is a big undertaking. Some of us in our career have been through the transition from No Child Left Behind, and so I think many of you may understand the magnitude of this process. For those that are new to a reauthorization of the major K-12 education law, strap yourselves in, get ready for the ride. We know how valuable your time is, and we've purposely made this webinar 45 minutes long. If you find that the timing of this webinar is too short, too long, or just right, and you feel very strongly about it, while we don't have a poll for that today, Jennifer and I were just speaking a couple moments ago, go ahead and send me an email about pacing of the presentation. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started.
So our first question is, what is your role in your educational organization? Is it district superintendent, district assistant superintendent, district level director or coordinator, school leader, or leader of another educational organization? Please respond and make sure you click submit, and Ellen's going to move on while we look at our poll results.
Because I've never met a superintendent who can't multitask, I'm going to go ahead and talk about one of the slides I have presented here, if you'll poll and listen along at the same time. This slide enthusiastically states the aspirational goals of the Every Child Succeeds Act. It was signed into law by President Obama in December 2015. It was, for many of us, a big sigh of relief because it was a bipartisan legislative action that took place, and we've been waiting for a very long time for the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind. The greatest hallmark of this reauthorization is probably the return of greater local and state control on implementing systems for academic standards and assessment, for accountability, for school and district improvement, and for educator evaluation and support. It focuses on state-designed or state-selected challenging academic standards, college and career readiness, greater access to high-quality preschool, greater flexibility in school and district-wide improvements. We'll also touch on today, because we're in an overview, but dive more deeply into the changes in allowable expenditures under Title I, which may be particularly of interest to superintendents. Last but not least, there is a very visible effort found within the law to try to balance the need for annual student outcome information against the competing need to reduce the burdens that come with testing, such as instructional time lost, test prep, etc. It's hard to look alone at Thank you. It's hard to look alone at this act without looking for a moment into the history of ESEA. And if you've studied this in grad school or in your doctorate program or in your 093, this is just a quick refresher. I will not spend a lot of time on this slide. It's really important to remember it was enacted in 1965 as LBJ's probably one of his biggest pieces of civil rights legislation. And it really looked to address the issues of equity and improved outcomes in education through federal funding. A common theme throughout the 50-year history of ESEA is probably the tensions between centralized federal control to drive improvement versus state and local control over spending, implementation, and improvements in their educational systems. Throughout the years, the legislation has imperfectly attempted to help every student in the United States reach his or her personal best. Throughout the 60s and 70s, as you can see in this chart, the focus was very much on access to high-quality educational opportunities for children in poverty, migrant children, and others. The education became a cabinet-level position within the presidential administration in the early 70s. Also of note, around 1976, IDEA was enacted to address the needs of students with disabilities. Beginning in the 80s, the focus started to shift towards how do we gauge the effectiveness of the use of federal funds as well as the accountability of local educational agencies and states, particularly in closing the achievement gaps among students of color, English learners, and students with disabilities. For those of you who will recall, around 1985 is when Connecticut started their testing program. It was a much more contained program administered to students every other year, but it was the early attempts to find out if the impact of federal funding was actually helping students to succeed. As we go forward in time, you can see the No Child Left Behind legislation really brought sort of our highest level of federal control over education in the states and at the local level. And you know, probably from experience, that there were very high stakes associated with that. There were very clear sanctions, and there was predetermined stepwise improvements required. But by 2011, after it was clear that Congress was gridlocked on the reauthorization of NCLB and that significant sanctions were looming for states and LEAs because the hoped-for outcomes of No Child Left Behind were yet to be realized, states were given the opportunity to apply for and then to update their plans for federal flexibility waivers. And it's based on three principles: college and career-ready standards and aligned assessments, the development of a differentiated accountability system, and the development of teacher evaluation with an inclusion of student growth on state assessments as an important factor among others in a multiple measure system. Connecticut has on 3 occasions renewed their application for flexibility, and I think as a result of some forward thinking during that period, our belief is that we're actually very well poised for implementing ESSA. Let me be incredibly clear that we have a long way to go still in understanding all the details and maybe some of the finer points, and we need to engage at a very high level with our stakeholders, but we think we're well placed to be able to do that. We're really mindful of the equity and fairness issues across our districts, and we are eager to engage with you to hear first and foremost your input before we develop a plan, and then feedback to the plan, which is called the Consolidated State Plan, following that point. And some of those finer points will be dealt with in the upcoming slides. Right now we have a polling question, and I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
So another polling question is about to pop open for you, in which we would like to know your level of knowledge regarding ESSA. Are you just now starting to learn about it? Do you have a general understanding? Or do you now have a deep understanding of many aspects of this new law? While you're responding, Ellen's going to continue on.
I'm going to go on to the next slide, Jennifer, but when the poll closes, could you kindly provide the folks who are on with the results from the poll?
Because there are some individuals that are calling in, and we understand that you cannot participate in our polls.
Oh, I see, okay. So,
oh, hang on one second, folks. We're getting there. There we go.
Okay, excellent. This is really a timeline, and I have to give a shout out to the NASSP because I took this slide from them because it lays out very clearly the basic implementation timeline. As I said earlier, December 15th, the law was signed. 2016, in August, our ESSA flexibility waivers expire, and we move into what's called the orderly transition period to ESSA, which will begin in earnest at the beginning of the 2017-2018 school year. So effectively, from this point in time until September of 2017, we are in an orderly transition period. The state of Connecticut has to work to develop, with a fair amount of stakeholder engagement, input, feedback, a consolidated state plan. And we will share with you what are the opportunities, what are the requirements, and what are our interpretations of the legislation. We have an internal team of leaders that will be meeting this summer to really decide on some key points. We will then go out and do extensive consultation, for which our communications office is planning now and has received really explicit training in how to engage at a very high level. We'll be doing that in late fall of 2016. We will draft in the winter of 2017, probably January, February, send the state plan out to all of you and other stakeholders for feedback, and again, be ready to submit by either the March date or the July 5th date, and I believe those two dates are determined by the U.S. Department of Education.
So just as a reminder of where our results are, you can see them on the right-hand side of your screen, but the majority of people, 50%, have a general understanding of the changes. Some other people are just starting to learn, and no one at this point is feeling very comfortable. So it looks like we're all learning together with it.
Absolutely. And can you go to the earlier poll, too, and talk about?
I will go back.
Okay, you go back, and we'll, at another break, we'll look and see who's
on the line.
Who's on the line. Excellent. So we'll go ahead to the next slide. So we're working very closely with the U.S. Department of Education. This is a very interesting time to have a law being implemented during an election year, and so we have asked the USED for a lot of guidance. This is what we've been told, and here's the three bullets, that states and districts should continue to implement the activities and programs they have in place now through the end of this year. We're going to be transitioning, but you have my commitment that if there are big changes ahead, this will not be a surprise. This is particularly true in the area of title funding. The formula, I am told, for title funding has not changed to the states, and it will not change in the 16-17 school year. So from a funding perspective, we do not anticipate any major changes. There are flexibilities that will go out with the consolidated title grant application for you to be able to use, and I'll touch on this today, but I'll go into greater detail in this in our September webinar. The USED, to their credit, is meeting with a lot of people, including teachers and administrators and people from the civil rights communities as well as others, to start to develop regulations. Regulations can be at times very long, drawn-out process. To their credit, the U.S. Department of Ed has met their first timeline because they've sent out proposed regulations already, and those are for the following areas: consolidated state plans, that's the requirements found within it, accountability systems, and data reporting. And that has already come out. If you would like to see a copy of those regulations, I commend you for being interested in looking at them. Go to the federalregister.gov where you can see them prominently displayed. Okay, I want to take just a moment to talk a little bit about the areas that are impacted by the changes found in ESSA. I won't go into this in great detail, but at Title I, at the policy level I mentioned earlier, we believe Connecticut is well aligned in this area, particularly standards and assessment. We know that part of the process is to consult with and collect input from you. So I don't want you to think it's a foregone conclusion, but we've worked very hard through the Governor's Task Force to increase the implementation of college and career-ready standards. We have an assessment that's been in place for 2 years now. We are open to discussing or hearing about possible changes. I'm not saying that we're anxious to make dramatic changes to either our standards or our assessment, but if we find overwhelming support for that, we'll certainly take it under consideration. In terms of assessment in Title I want to be clear that states and districts still must test a minimum of 95% of the total population, as well as each student subgroup. District Title I implementation plans must include teacher, principal, and parent consultation, and must also identify any resource inequities that would impact improvement at the school level. This will, in future webinars, we'll unpack this a great deal. The resource inequity issue is rising to the fore in Title I discussions. We're still waiting for other aspects of regulations related to that. Title II, ESSA puts a greater emphasis on principal professional development than it has in the past, and it creates a 3% fund set aside that may be used for principal and other leadership development. The highly qualified teacher clause of no child left behind has been eliminated, and teacher evaluations are largely de-linked from student growth as a federal requirement. I want to be clear that state law still requires, here in Connecticut, still requires the linking of student growth, student data as a small portion of the teacher evaluation system. Title III. Here the law creates greater flexibility to use your Title I resources to serve English learner students. It also allows states to grant bonuses to districts who make large gains in English language proficiency and achievement. Separate academic measures for the nation's 5 million English learners are now eliminated. Accountability for English learners is now expected to be included in the main state accountability system. This is a change, but it's a good one. We're still working on the details of this. A new grant program found in Title IV for a student support and academic enrichment may be used for a variety of areas, including school climate, health and safety, technology, and training. If you're interested in this area, again, access the ESSA law on the U.S. Department of Ed website, because there are some great opportunities to support students through this title. Title V allows greater transferability of funding, especially resources that were once only available to rural school districts, which are now available to all systems if eligible. Historically, Connecticut hasn't had Title V funding. We are very interested in digging into this to see if it's a relevant title for our state. Title VI, the law emphasizes greater collaboration on using resources between districts and tribes or other organizations that represent American Indians, Alaskan Natives, and other cultural education consortiums. If the districts themselves don't apply to use the allocated resources, those groups may apply directly for the funding. More on this as we demystify the law. Title VII, districts with federal properties within their borders for which they receive in lieu of taxes, perhaps payments, have 2 new A's, a hold harmless provision against the reduction of more than 20% in a single year, and a requirement of timely payment of those funds. Title VIII now contains language that specifically limits federal officials from actions outside the scope of their authority. This includes the implementations of laws or the mandating of expenditure of funds at the state or local level. Title IX, last but not least, this section now includes language on students' First Amendment rights about when speaking at school. That's an overview of the title areas. I want to welcome, because he's a busy guy, wanted everywhere he goes. Here's my friend Ajit Gopalakrishnan, our performance officer. I just wanted you to have a chance to say hello.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks, Ellen.
I'm going to go ahead and proceed with the next slide. And again, I'm not going to go into great detail. I do want to point out, for those of you who have not committed to memory, the Part A's, B's, and C's. Part A is the basic functioning part of the Title I Act. It's for improving basic programs. Part C relates to migrant children. Part D refers to prevention and intervention programs for neglected, delinquent, and at-risk children or youth. You know, Title II Part A is for preparing, training, and recruiting high-quality teachers, principals, and school leaders. As I mentioned earlier, greater focus on school leaders as a component of the new law. Title III Part A is language instruction for English learners and immigrant student accountability. There is, and Ajit will speak to it in a few moments, a change in some Title III, especially in the area of improvement plans, paperwork, and AMAO. Thank you. I got my vowels wrong there. Title IV, Part A is for student supports and enrichment grants. Title IV, Part B is 21st Century Community Learning Centers. And Part B, Subpart 2 is for rural low-income schools. There's a graphic on this slide that basically will share with you the components of the development of a good consolidated state plan. And I won't read this to you, but you can see that consultation and coordination plays a huge part in a state plan, as well as the academic, the accountability, the educator effectiveness, and last but not least, the supporting all students. Each one of those circles on the outside really tied to one of the title programs, and this really is the model we're operating from, that we support students, we support educators, and we develop the structures and the clarity and the coherence in assessment and accountability. Assessment, standards, and accountability. So let me spend a moment talking about, thank you. Let me spend a moment talking, we're just getting our papers straight here. Let me spend a moment talking about this component, which, if you're familiar at all with our ESSA waiver, this is Principle 1. The requirements of ESSA are also that we must have rigorous or challenging academic standards and aligned assessment, and that there's some opportunities. That's it in a nutshell. The CSDE has worked closely with stakeholders on implementing the recommendations of the Governor's Task Force. We spoke about that a moment ago. Smarter Balanced Assessment is aligned with those standards, and we continue to work with superintendents on improvements to implementing Smarter Balance through surveys, through what we hope is high levels of customer service on the implementation of that assessment, and also with the new introduction of SAT as both a state accountability measure, but also as a double dip in terms of paying for and supporting students who may not previously have been able to take a college entrance exam. And last but not least, for students that were always going to take a college entrance exam, it maybe kills two birds with one stone. We've adopted, in addition, and to this point I have to say we're ahead of the game across the nation. Following a phone call with a national partner this morning that Ajit and I were on, we were actually asked, because Connecticut seemed so far along, we didn't really realize that we were so far along, so that's good news. We've aligned science and social studies standards that are completely aligned to the Common Core state standards. We're also, as part of our waiver, have adopted English proficiency standards that are aligned as well. And you all know we use the lost links and have historically used it, and use the forms C and D, which have much more academic content, to cover the academic component, and those, we've done an alignment study for that assessment, Form C and D, to ensure that they are aligned with our ELP standards. We have a minimum participation rate of 95 that's well known to this audience, and it's worth noting, and I cannot stress this enough, that ESSA is silent on opt-out. And in the absence of a state law, the CSDE will continue to have no official policy on opt-out. That means that we believe 100% participation in state assessment is part of our values, and the State Board of Education values equity and excellence, and one of the ways we achieve that is by measuring annually at the summative level, and we are measuring at a very high level now, how students are performing and our progress towards closing the achievement gap, which we all know has been a persistent problem. I also want to state that we know that parents have always had the right to control what activities their students, their children take part in schools. Having worked in schools, you know, there were always parents that were not interested in having their child be part of a human reproduction lesson or other type, other types of activities. Ultimately, parents and students have the right to make those choices. The impact, the consequence of those choices is typically, the burden is at the district level and the state level. And it's really important to understand the nuances of that. Some states do have opt-out laws. Our belief in maintaining, we have a strong belief in maintaining the minimum amount of annual testing imposed on students, schools, and districts, which leads us to thinking we really do not anticipate changes in terms of innovations to assessment at this time. I also do want to say that under opportunities, however, the new changes to the law in Title I in particular allow for states and districts to audit or examine their assessment usage. This is the equivalent, and maybe we're ahead of the curve there too, Ajit. This is the equivalent of our assessment reduction grants. So while we're not committing to that, it's certainly something we're going to vigorously look at. Would it make sense to make grants available using Title funds or to allow states to put that in their Title I plans? So we'll know more about that as we start to sketch out a state plan. And I'm now going
Thank you, Ellen.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon again, everyone. I'm going to speak to the accountability sections as it pertains to ESSA. The law clarifies what is expected, and draft federal regulations or proposed regulations have just been released, so we're digging into all of that. But given what we know, obviously in Connecticut, after ESSA flexibility in 2012, we modified our accountability system to move away from AYP and the really punitive approach that AYP uses. We moved to an index. We put in a school classification system. State law was modified to align with that. And then just this past March, after extensive consultation with a wide variety of stakeholders, we launched a next-generation accountability system. A big component of that is the notion that test scores alone don't define the success of a school or the failure of a school, that we really need to look at multiple indicators of student and school success to really get a more fuller picture. And guess what ESSA did was pretty much to require a accountability system that incorporates multiple measures. And the ESSA requirements include academic achievement, graduation rates, as well as school quality or school success indicators. And these are from the federal law, and you will actually recognize some of these indicators that are already in play in our accountability system, such as student engagement when it comes to an indicator like chronic absenteeism, clearly access to advanced coursework, which is indicator 5 in our system, and post-secondary readiness, which includes achievement on college readiness exams, as well as actual entrance into post-secondary education, which are all part of our system already. So again, as Ellen indicated previously with other sections of ESSA, even in the accountability realm, we're actually very well positioned for this transition. So again, and this is something good to know that we've been making over time. It's not something, we're not going to have to do a complete U-turn or a complete turn to align to ESSA. We're already well on our way.
Well, and I did hear today on our call with that national partner I spoke of, they asked what the burden would be to schools and districts to collect all this new data for this new accountability system, because in other states it's sort of a crushing load. And we were really pleased to say that much of the data we collect, in fact all of the data we collect.
Yeah, we're not collecting anything new.
We're not collecting anything new, and that was one of our values here at the department, is we felt we had ample indicators, and we just had to look through our data collection series to find really potent places. So we're hoping you feel like we do, that without dramatic changes necessary under ESSA, that we continue like we have in Connecticut over the last several years to be sensitive to the needs of folks at the school and district level, and to maintain a high bar, but to equally try to reduce burdens that often come with new initiatives.
The other element within ESSA is an option for states to incorporate academic growth on state assessments into elementary, middle school accountability systems. As you all know, this is already in our Next Generation Accountability Plan. It is a big part of it because we do believe that growth for the same students from one year to the next is a more accurate reflection of what's happening in the school than just measuring proficiency or status achievement of who's in there in that particular year. So we're pleased that ESSA actually references academic growth when the prior law did not reference academic growth, so we're pleased to see that, and we're in alignment there. The one area that we do need to adjust our Next Generation Accountability System, it won't happen immediately, but it's something that we do need to do, is around the Title III accountability that Ellen referenced. The AMAO system that was in play for Title III EL for English learners, which really kept accountability in a separate sphere when it came to English learners. Now the expectation within ESSA is to incorporate English learner accountability within the overall accountability system, and we think that actually is a really good change because it really elevates the visibility of the English learners in the overall accountability system. And I think you know in your districts and definitely at the state level, this is an increasing component of our overall student population, even though our total enrollment might be declining at a state level, but the proportion of English learners actually has increased. So we think that elevating their achievement and growth in the accountability system is good. The precise indicator for this is still in discussion and with the federal government and reviewing the regulations, and we will be absolutely reaching out to districts and to English learner leaders at the district level through organizations like Capel to get feedback on this, and we already have made multiple outreaches to Capel, but the indicator, the statute prescribes something that looks at progress toward English proficiency. So we think it'll be a combination of looking at actual growth on the Lost Links assessment, which is our English learner proficiency assessment, but also looking at actual achievement, proficiency attainment on that assessment. So it'll be a combination of things that we'll sort of refine over time, but that we think is a welcome change to the system. The next component, two components I'll discuss, one is around subgroup accountability. ESSA emphasizes the notion of looking at subgroups, each of the individual subgroups, and we will continue to do that in Connecticut as we have for years. We will continue to look at each of the individual subgroups, but at this point our plan is to also continue to incorporate the high needs subgroup as part of our accountability system. As you know, the high needs subgroup is a student is considered to be part of the high needs subgroup if he or she is a member of at least one of the 3 subgroups of English learner students with disabilities or those eligible for free or reduced price meals. So we feel like that supergroup has actually included thousands more students in Connecticut as part of accountability calculations when previously, if you just looked at the individual subgroups due to small n sizes, thousands of students were being excluded from our accountability calculation. So we're actually pleased with the ESSA focus on the individual subgroups, but it appears that we will be able to continue to incorporate our high-need subgroup as well, which we feel is important. And Ellen's already talked to the second point on the slide, which is the 95% participation rate. ESSA requires that participation rate be included in the accountability system, and here's one other instance where we feel like we already have that part taken care of, because participation factors into school classifications as well as things like identification for schools of distinction. The one other element here has to do with school identification, and this is something, to be fair, something that we're still reviewing closely. The proposed regulations just came out a couple of weeks ago, and we're pouring through it in terms of the requirements and the obligations for states. The good news is that we recently, in March, when we released the next generation system, identified our lowest performing 5% of schools using the accountability index, our turnaround schools. We've also identified our focus schools, schools with our lowest performing subgroups. So at this point, we don't expect to refresh those lists anytime soon.
Right.
So we will be pouring through these regulations and then coming back to you with greater clarity at a future time. So I just wanted to make that clear. As part of our next generation accountability system and aligned with state law, though, we will be identifying schools in categories 1, 2, and 3. We identified categories 4 and 5 this past March, but we will be doing categories 1, 2, and 3 that is required per our state legislation as well. So we'll be doing that.
And I'll go ahead and speak to the school improvement plan area, because I work very closely with Desi Nesmith, our Chief Turnaround Officer. One of the big changes in this law is that evidence-based intervention is now sort of been opened up, that you are no longer required, if you're a turnaround school or a focus school, you're no longer required to select from a very short list of school models to use for improvement efforts. So there really is, when it comes to problem solving, we're big believers in creativity at the most local level, as long as it's evidence-based, really should be allowed to grow. It's contextual. It's really important to understand what the needs are at the local level. So we see this as a big plus. You can see that based on a school level needs assessment, all the school improvement plans have to do a thorough investigation of what the needs are. Very big in this law is the identification of resource inequities. And in a future webinar, I'll talk about the supplant versus, the supplement versus supplant focus that's found in Title I. If there are resource inequities in a turnaround school significant enough, this will lead to part of the solution. And so we'll go into that in much greater detail. Approval by school district and state, it's really important to engage in your turnaround plans at the local level. And the State Department of Ed, through our turnaround program, has a very well-articulated system for doing that, which will be expanded to schools and districts that would require it. It'll become a very public document, and training will be provided. Last but not least, monitoring and periodic review. You've all heard of the desk audit, the on-site visit. We will develop a system that is appropriately random selection, but guarantees that everybody gets checked over time, as well as always keeping an eye on reducing the burden of auditing or site visits to the districts. But as the protectors and keepers of the federal funds as well as the state funds, we take that responsibility seriously. So we will continue in that area. Moving on to the next slide. I'm not going to read this slide to you, and in a future webinar, we'll dive deeply into the impact of teacher evaluation and equity coming out of ESSA. What I can tell you is that the Title I state plan that we'll be working on will involve many aspects of the federal equity plan that we were required to develop last year or the year, I think it was last year, in
15 we submitted.
15, we submitted that. But it's really looking at the inequity where children of color, children from low income are tend to be taught more often by inexperienced teachers. At least that's very true in Connecticut. Not necessarily ineffective out of field, but inexperienced is very much the case. And what can we do to help our districts with higher levels of turnover or more challenging environments? What can we do to help our districts build a robust system of supports for those educators? And we've seen some great examples. For example, many of our districts that were part of the equity plan and the equity supports this year did not use exit interviews to find out why they're losing good teachers. The question about whether it's just I'm going someplace else for a better salary versus the working conditions or the professional climate may not be what they are. When you have a challenging environment, you have to take care of the caretakers, and so the teachers really need special supports. This is a piece we're going to take very, very seriously and already have begun some great efforts on. I'm not going to, like I said, get into a lot of detail, but title funds can be used for a variety of evaluation and teacher support, leader support components, and that there is an opportunity to look at, the law allows an opportunity to look at your evaluation measures and whether you want to keep them or not. I want to be really clear about that at the federal level. Connecticut state statute does require that we maintain, as part of our evaluation system, 22.5% of the teacher evaluation is standardized assessment at this time. And moving along. These are some areas of focus. We shared that in June of 2016. Accountability systems regulations have been submitted, have been proposed, and they're out there. As we go forward, regulations on student assessment will focus on students with disability and English learners, and we're anxiously awaiting the Title I funding regulations, as well as of less importance, but we're also, what we're expecting is the innovative assessment regulations as well. Time for a poll?
It's time for a poll. So our next session, which is going to be held on September 15th, will focus on accountability systems. We would like to know which of the following topics would you like to learn more about in the future? Consolidated state plans, academic standards and assessment, school improvement, or teacher evaluation and equity. While the results are coming in, Ellen's going to go over a few resources that are available for you.
So let's take a look at this slide, and again, I'm not going to read it to you, but I will share with you that I compiled a variety of resources that I think are at a level appropriate for superintendents. I hope that you find these helpful. We will be publishing this slide deck, and it will have clickable access to these resources. Jen, do you want to share with us the results of the most recent poll?
Our most recent poll, I'm going to close it right now, and it takes about 19 seconds. But
okay,
but if you want to just go back real quick, just so you know, most of the people on the webinar today are district superintendents.
Oh, good to know.
So thank you for joining us.
And what's the percentage? Do you
we have 36% that are district superintendents and 21% that are district assistant superintendents, followed by 7% that are at the district level and their supervisor or coordinator, and then another 7% that are leader of another type of an educational organization.
Well, welcome everyone. We're glad you're with us today.
And now we have the results up for what your future interests are. At this point, about 10% of you are interested in the consolidated state plans. 43% would like to look at the academic standards and assessment. 5% would like to know more about school improvement, and 24% are interested in teacher evaluation and equity.
Excellent. This really helps us shape the order and the sort of level of intensity and depth we'll get to in our future webinars. Speaking of future webinars.
Okay, so.
I'm trying to move it along here.
There we go. We're on to some questions. So at this time, we're coming to the end of our webinar, but we're going to open it up to a couple questions. to see if anyone has any questions or concerns that we can address. I see first up that someone's asking, will the recording accompany the slide deck, or will the presentation video be accessible somewhere? So that is going to show up in about one more slide as to where you can find the video with the recording, and we will actually put the slide deck up right alongside it.
Absolutely. Jen, does it take time to post the recording, or can it be pretty immediate?
It will be there by the end of the week.
Excellent. Terrific. I can tell you in just a quick moment, two places. One, the Superintendent Digest, which is on our homepage, csde.gov. It's up in the, if I recall, upper right-hand corner. It will be posted there. We also, for those of you familiar with the CT Core Standards webpage, it'll be there as well, and you'll see it in a slide coming up.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And we're looking for a couple other questions. One question that did come up, does ESSA require that a portion of the schools in the state will always be identified as being in need of improvement?
Yes, Jen. as currently drafted, because they are using normative language as in the lowest 5%, there will always be a bottom 5% that is required to be identified for comprehensive intervention and support. At least that's how it seems like at this point.
And I will join the protest when we get to the point that everyone's in great shape and we're inadvertently, we're unnecessarily identifying the bottom 5%. I hope that happens in my career, and I welcome that opportunity. Thanks for those questions. We're realizing that we're out of time, but here is a posting of our next two webinars. We will try to present monthly. Can't promise that that will always happen, but we're going to try to present monthly beginning next year, always on a Thursday, always from 2 to 2:45, unless we get feedback from you that A, it's a bad time, or B, that it's not enough time and we should extend it to 3 o'clock. So make note of that, and those are the topics that we're looking at in the future, but we're going to sit down and review your feedback that you provided today, and we thank you for that.
And just one note is that that third date for webinar 3, that is a brand new date that we did not have on the original flyers due to the rescheduling. So please make sure that you mark that one on your calendars, because that was not announced previously.
And our next slide.
And then at this point, we want to thank you for participating in today's webinar. And we also want to thank Ellen and Ajit for sharing this information today. As we mentioned before, the recording of the webinar will be posted within the week, and you can find it in those 2 locations. If you have any additional questions, please use the contact information for Ellen and Ajit that's currently displayed on your screen. We look forward to our next webinar, once again, on Thursday, September 15th from 2 to 2:45. Again, I want to thank you all and wish you a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you.